A simple grandmother was forced to play an old violin, but she moved everyone with her talent. The wrinkled hands holding the broken violin trembled for an instant, but when the bow touched the strings, the music that exploded in the room silenced even the most arrogant of those present. Be sure to subscribe and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. In the prestigious Elmwood Concert Hall in Boston, Massachusetts, the air conditioning hummed softly while the crystal lights reflected off the polished instruments of the Philharmonic Orchestra. It was the institution's annual gala, an event that attracted the cultural and financial elite of the American East Coast. Men in impeccable suits and women adorned with jewelry that cost more than many houses conversed in educated tones, champagne glasses tinkling in an almost musical rhythm. Sarah Miller, a 78-year-old woman, remained standing near the entrance. Her presence contrasted with the refined environment. She wore a simple blue cotton dress, a wool coat that had seen better days, and comfortable shoes worn by time. Her gray hair was tied in an awkward bun, and her hands, marked by decades of hard work, firmly held a crumpled invitation. "Excuse me," Sarah said to a young receptionist. "My grandson bought this ticket for me as a birthday present." The young man looked at her with barely disguised disdain. "Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right place? This is the annual Boston Philharmonic Gala." The event director, Victoria Harrington, approached with determined steps upon noticing the disturbance at the perfectly orchestrated entrance to her gala. "Any problem, Thomas?" Her voice was as sharp as a knife. "This lady says she has an invitation," replied the receptionist with a condescending smile. Victoria examined Sarah from head to toe, her cold eyes calculating the value of each piece of clothing and finding it insufficient. "May I see your invitation, please?" Sarah handed over the crumpled paper. Victoria examined it with fingers that seemed not to want to touch something handled by hands like Sarah's. "This appears to be a legitimate invitation," Victoria admitted with evident displeasure. "Although I don't understand how you obtained it. These tickets cost $1,000. As I said, it was a gift from my grandson. He knows I like music." Victoria forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, since you have a valid invitation, I suppose we can't prevent you from entering. Thomas, show the lady to a table in the back." The hall was divided into elegantly decorated round tables. Thomas led Sarah to a table partially hidden by a column, clearly intended for unwanted visitors who, through some administrative misfortune, had managed to obtain tickets. The table was already occupied by a middle-aged couple who barely disguised their disappointment when Sarah sat down. "Good evening," Sarah greeted, with a genuine smile. The woman nodded briefly before turning to her husband and murmuring, "I thought these tables were only for sponsors." "Apparently they're now letting anyone in," replied the man without bothering to lower his voice. Sarah pretended not to hear, maintaining her dignity intact while observing the hall. Musicians in formal attire circulated among the guests, their instruments temporarily abandoned on the stage. A solitary violin rested on a stand, its elegant contours capturing the light from the lamps. "It must be nice to be able to pay someone to tune your instrument," thought Sarah, her wrinkled hands moving unconsciously as if playing invisible strings. Dinner was served with the precision of a well-rehearsed orchestra. Waiters in impeccable uniforms glided between tables, depositing porcelain plates with elaborate culinary creations that more resembled works of art. When the waiter reached Sarah's table, he hesitated for a moment, as if unsure whether he should serve her. "Would you like the main course or would you prefer something more simple?" he asked in a condescending tone. "The same as everyone else is having will be perfect." "Thank you," Sarah replied calmly. At the next table, a group of arts patrons discussed music with the authority of those who could afford proximity to talent. Of course, no one can really appreciate Paganini without understanding the technical complexity of his compositions, declared a well-groomed bearded man, his voice projected to be heard beyond his table. Absolutely, agreed his companion. Most people only appreciate popular music because they lack the sophistication necessary to understand true art. Sarah smiled to herself, savoring each forkful of her meal while listening to the conversations floating around her. After dinner, Victoria Harrington climbed onto the small stage and adjusted the microphone. "Welcome to our 30th annual Boston Philharmonic Gala," she announced. "Tonight, we celebrate not only classical music but also those whose generous support makes our continuity possible." Polite applause filled the hall. To start our evening, we have a small tradition. We always ask one of our guests to play a brief piece on one of our instruments. It's a light and fun way to remind everyone why we value professional musicians so much. Indulgent laughter echoed through the room. This year, I thought of something different. Instead of choosing one of our beloved patrons, I thought of inviting our unexpected visitor. All eyes turned to Sarah. "You, ma'am, at the back table. Would you like to come up here and show us your appreciation for classical music?" The invitation wasn't genuine. It was a public humiliation disguised as inclusion. Victoria smiled, certain that the old lady would refuse, or worse yet, accept and humiliate herself. Sarah remained seated for a moment, her eyes staring at Victoria with disconcerting calm. Then, slowly she stood up and walked toward the stage. Murmurs spread through the room as Sarah climbed onto the stage with cautious steps. Some guests laughed discreetly. Others watched with ill-intentioned curiosity. "What is your name?" Victoria asked into the microphone, her smile now a mask of false cordiality. "Sarah Miller," the elderly woman responded in a clear voice, showing no sign of intimidation. "Well, Sarah, do you play any instrument?" "A little violin, when I was younger," Sarah replied modestly. Victoria looked at the musicians present, who exchanged ironic smiles. "Wonderful," exclaimed Victoria with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Unfortunately, our professional violins are too valuable for inexperienced hands." Her eyes rested on Sarah's wrinkled hands. "Oh, but wait," continued Victoria. "We have that old violin that was to be discarded, don't we, maestro?" A corpulent man nodded and headed backstage, returning with a visibly damaged violin. The wood was cracked in several places, the varnish peeling, and only 3 of the 4 strings remained intact. "This should be suitable for a brief demonstration," said Victoria, handing the instrument to Sarah. "Perhaps something simple, like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." More laughter in the audience now, not even trying to disguise it. Sarah received the battered violin, examining it with experienced eyes. Her fingers ran over the cracks with surprising familiarity. She tested the tension of the remaining strings and gently adjusted one of the pegs. "This should do," she murmured to herself, placing the violin under her chin with a naturalness that made some of the mocking smiles falter. As she positioned the bow, something changed in her posture. The seemingly fragile elderly woman seemed to grow on stage. Her shoulders straightened, and her face assumed an expression of deep concentration. "Actually," said Sarah, her voice suddenly strong and confident, "I thought of playing something by Paganini since I heard some guests discussing his works during dinner." Victoria laughed nervously. Perhaps something less ambitious would be. But Sarah had already closed her eyes and begun to play. The first notes of Paganini's Caprice No. 24 filled the room, executed with a precision that immediately silenced all conversations. Sarah's fingers flew over the strings with an agility that defied her age, extracting from the damaged violin a sound that seemed impossible. The piece, considered one of the most technically demanding ever written for solo violin, flowed from her hands as if they were an extension of the instrument itself. The complex variations were articulated with crystalline clarity, and even with one string less, Sarah compensated with technical adjustments that only a true virtuoso could conceive. The faces around the room gradually transformed, first surprise, then disbelief, and finally, an awe that bordered on the reverential. Victoria remained paralyzed by the side of the stage, her smile frozen in an expression of absolute shock. As Sarah continued her impeccable performance, an elderly man in the front row slowly stood up, his eyes watering. It was Marcus Wellington, the emeritus director of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and a legend in the world of classical music. "It can't be," he whispered, approaching the stage like someone seeing a ghost. As Sarah's fingers danced over the violin, executing the dizzying arpeggios of the caprice with intimate familiarity, Wellington turned to the astonished audience. "Do you know who is playing?" he asked with a choked voice. "It's Sarah Miller." Sarah Miller. The name did not provoke immediate recognition in most of those present, but some of the older musicians turned pale. "Sarah Elizabeth Miller," continued Wellington, "the prodigious violinist who disappeared from the music scene 50 years ago, after her legendary performance at Carnegie Hall, the woman whom Yehudi Menuhin called the greatest natural interpreter of Paganini who ever existed." The music continued to flow, Sarah now completely absorbed in her art, as if she were alone in a private rehearsal instead of at the center of a surprising revelation. Her recording of Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto is still considered definitive in conservatories, explained Wellington to the stunned audience. She declined a chair at Juilliard, preferring to teach disadvantaged children in the countryside. And then, she simply disappeared from the public radar. Victoria, now pale, turned to one of the organizers. "Why didn't anyone check the guest list?" she hissed. "Her name appeared only as S. Miller," the man replied in an anguished whisper, "and the ticket was purchased by her grandson." The piece was approaching the finale, Sarah's fingers executing the impossible double harmonics that had made critics from around the world declare her a genius in her youth. When the last note reverberated through the hall, there followed a moment of absolute silence, as if no one dared break the enchantment. Then, Wellington began to applaud, tears freely streaming down his wrinkled face. In seconds, the entire room was on its feet, the applause growing into an ovation that shook the crystal chandeliers. Sarah opened her eyes and smiled shyly, making a small bow. She handed the damaged violin to Victoria, who received it as if it were a sacred relic. "Thank you for the loan," said Sarah with simplicity. "It has a surprisingly good tone, despite the cracks." Wellington climbed onto the stage and took Sarah's hands in his. "Where have you been all these years?" he asked, his voice breaking with emotion. "Living, Marcus," she replied. "Just living. After my husband passed away, I dedicated myself to raising our son. He gave me a wonderful grandson who insisted that I come tonight." The maître d'hôtel hurried to escort Sarah to a table of honor, while patrons and musicians gathered around her, all eager to exchange a few words with the rediscovered legend. Victoria Harrington approached hesitantly, her face a mask of humiliation and regret. "Mrs. Miller, I have no words to express." "None are necessary," Sarah gently interrupted. "You had no way of knowing. But the way I treated you teaches a valuable lesson," completed Sarah, "one that we all need to relearn from time to time." The couple who had shared the table with Sarah appeared, deeply embarrassed. "Your hands," said the woman, looking at Sarah's fingers. "They look so worked," suggested Sarah. "Yes, they are. After I left the stage, I taught music in public schools for almost 40 years, and gardening is my hobby. The earth is good for the soul." In minutes, Sarah's story was circulating around the hall, each retelling adding nuances to the legend. Information emerged that she had refused an exclusive contract with Deutsche Grammophon at 25, at the time the largest ever offer to a violinist to marry a mathematics professor and move to a small town. "I never regretted it," explained Sarah to the small circle that now surrounded her. "Music has always been with me, just in different forms, in the lullabies for my son, in the lessons for my students, in the hymns at the local church where I play on Sundays." Wellington, who had not left her side, asked, "But a talent like yours, didn't you feel that the world was deprived of something precious?" Sarah smiled with serenity. "The world is full of music, Marcus. Not all of it needs to be played in grand concert halls." As the night progressed, something extraordinary happened. The rigid hierarchy that governed the event began to dissolve. Young musicians sat at Sarah's feet, absorbing her words as if they were notes from a rare score. Victoria, partially recovering from her shock, announced a change in the program. "Tonight we have the unexpected honor of being in the presence of one of the greatest artists of our musical tradition. In recognition, our orchestra would like to dedicate the next piece to Sarah Miller." The musicians positioned themselves and, as a special tribute, played the second movement of Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto, Sarah's defining recording, the one that had inspired generations of violinists. As the music filled the environment, silent tears ran down Sarah's face. They were not tears of regret or nostalgia, but of recognition, of the complete cycle that her life had traced, of the choices she had made and of the beauty that those choices had allowed. When the event came to an end, it was past midnight. Sarah rose to leave, politely declining offers of rides in limousines and luxury cars. "My grandson will pick me up," she explained. "He's as punctual as a metronome." At the entrance to the hall, a young man of about 20 waited, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt. His face lit up when he saw his grandmother. "So, Grandma, was it worth it?" Sarah smiled, taking the arm he offered. "More than you can imagine, dear." As they walked away, Wellington approached hurriedly. "Sarah, wait. The orchestra would like to invite you to be our guest soloist next season." A triumphant return. Sarah stopped and considered the offer for a moment. "You know, Marcus, 50 years ago I would have been ecstatic about this invitation. And now?" he asked anxiously. "Now," she said, looking affectionately at her grandson, "I have a school recital to attend next week, where my grandson will play his first solo violin piece. There is no stage in the world that is more important to me." As they walked away, the young man looked at his grandmother with curiosity. "You're not even a little tempted?" Sarah laughed softly. "Music was never about applause for me, David. It was always about what it awakens in us. And tonight, I hope it awakens something important in some people." "What?" he asked. "The understanding that value and dignity have no relation to appearances or social status, and that true art can exist in the most unexpected places, even in the hands of an old lady with a broken violin." In the car, driving home, Sarah looked out the window at the city lights. Her grandson turned on the radio, and the soft notes of a violin filled the space. She closed her eyes and smiled, knowing that she had played the most important melody of all, that of humility, respect, and recognition of the inherent dignity of every human being, regardless of their outward appearance. And that melody, unlike any Paganini piece, would never be forgotten by those who had the privilege of witnessing it that night. If you've come this far, and this story has touched your heart, I invite you to keep this faith alive with us by subscribing to the channel and activating the notification bell so you don't miss any stories that touch the soul. And if this story has moved you, give it a like so we can continue sharing more stories like this one, made with all our hearts. Until next time.